Amber Alert Podcast.
Welcome back, Amber Alert Podcast. This is episode 93, part 2. I am your host, Amber Starkey, and it is a great day to be alive. Now, we just ended part 1. That was its own live video. Hopefully, everything's good to go. I know when there's a short turnaround between starting one live video, ending it, and then starting another one, sometimes there are problems with visibility. One thing doesn't really end quite right. So hopefully it's okay. I had mentioned what I want to talk about, and this is part 2. This is our middle portion of the whole episode, which is always like a conspiracy theory or some kind of supernatural event, something unexplained, largely unexplained, right? So I found out about something crazy. When I say crazy, I mean unsettling. To me, it doesn't really feel unsettling just because I've heard of this stuff before. I'll tell you what I think this is about, but it's something strange that happened in Russia, and it happened in a place that has a long history of being weird, of unexplained, unnatural things happening both to people and kind of to animals too. So I'll tell you what I think is behind it. It's called, the place where this happened, it's called Dyatlov Pass. And I can't do a Russian accent. I don't eat bowls of nails for breakfast and wash it down with vodka and then go fight a bear for fun. Russian people are not afraid of anything. So this happened in Russia, and it's called Dyatlov Pass. And I'm sorry that I may not be saying that right, because like I said, I am not Russian. I am pretty German, but not Russian. So let's get into what happened at Dyatlov Pass and what the place is, because after I found out about what happened here, this happened in 1959, which is the main story I'm going to give you. It is not the first weird thing that's happened there, and it's not even the latest weird thing that's happened there. But the history of this particular place goes back for thousands of years, and apparently it's always been not right. So first of all, we'll get into what happened in 1959. First things first, one of the strangest, best documented disappearance or death cases on Earth. Which is why I don't know why I didn't know about this, but I didn't. So is there a way for me to make this less like weird? No, I can't read that very well. So let's go back to how we had it. Okay. What makes Dyatlov Pass different from most mysteries is this. We have bodies, photos, journals, official autopsies, timelines, and multiple investigations, and it still makes no sense. So you're probably thinking, well, why? Why doesn't it make sense? I'm so glad you asked, imaginary person, because I'm about to explain. Below are the strangest cases and anomalies, not the watered down version. So obviously there are watered down versions out there because this also includes government hush-hush. So the core incident happened in 1959. 9 experienced hikers led by Igor Dyatlov. So they literally named this place after him. All were university students or graduates, cold weather experts, properly equipped. The destination was Northern Ural Mountains, location later named Dyatlov Pass after Igor. They never returned. So keep in mind, they were experienced hikers. And obviously, you're going to be a cold weather expert if you're from Russia. I don't know if all of them were from Russia because they were university students or graduates. So there's a chance they were in Russia from somewhere else. But even if you've been in Russia for any period of time, you're probably kind of an expert when it comes to cold weather because it's freezing. Next, the first possible fact, the tent. So they go missing, right? And here's what happened. So the tent got cut open from the inside. This is one of the first very interesting things about this, and I'll revisit that. So it's cut open from the inside. There are boots, coats, food, money, and documents left behind. All right. There's no sign of a struggle inside the tent. Footprints leading downhill, some barefoot, some in socks. This alone breaks logic. Now, if you could, I don't know, the only explanation you could come up with would be that someone held a gun to the outside of the tent and they said, cut it open and walk out here and don't put on shoes. That could have happened, which would be weird. I don't, if you're going to come after some hikers, that doesn't really make sense why that would. So it doesn't make sense. Okay. So no trained mountaineer would cut their way out of a tent. They wouldn't leave their boots in negative 30 degrees Celsius weather. And they wouldn't just walk calmly downhill into darkness. Okay. And again, unless your life is you're being led at gunpoint or something, which again, getting out of the tent that way doesn't make sense if that's the case. So the bodies, where it gets truly disturbing. Group 1 was found quickly. They were lightly dressed, signs of paradoxal undressing. But the death was ruled a homicide. So remember, we do have official autopsies, but even the autopsies don't make sense. So, being the dressing or undressing is weird already. Group 2, they found months later after the snow had melted. All right. These hikers had injuries that do not match hypothermia. The autopsy findings: crushed rib cages, massive internal hemorrhaging, skull fractures, no external wounds. Are you kidding me? How are you going to have a crushed rib cage, massive internal hemorrhaging, a skull fracture, and yet no external wound? Not possible. Okay. One woman, she had things missing. Her tongue was missing. Her eyes were missing. And that's not all. Soft tissue was gone. So the medical examiner wrote the force was comparable to a car crash, and yet there was no avalanche debris, no slope steep enough, and no signs of tumbling or impact. Again, no external injuries, just these massive injuries on the inside and one lady missing some parts that don't make sense and just don't make sense. So radiation is the part that nobody likes to talk about. Let's get into that. The clothing from 2 of the hikers tested abnormally radioactive. Now, both of them had worked previously at Soviet nuclear facilities. Radiation levels were not environmental background. Why this matters: if it were contamination from work, why only certain clothes? Why was the fact buried in the final report? Again, this whole thing has government cover up to it. Now, there also were witnesses who reported lights in the sky. Multiple independent reports in that region that same week reported seeing orange glowing orbs and slow moving lights. And if you are not familiar with this whole subject, I promise you I'm going to tie it together for you. So these things were seen by local villagers, other hikers, and military observers. So it's not just one person who swears they saw something. This is multiple reports from different people, really with nothing in common. Official Soviet documents confirm aerial phenomena reports were logged, but then they were sealed. All right. So you got to ask yourself, first of all, you've obfuscated the radiation, and now you're sealing it when it talks about these aerial things that we're seeing. Why are you doing that? So the red flags, the final conclusion is a compelling unknown force is what killed them. That phrase is real. It's actually in the report. Other red flags: the area was closed for 3 years. Files were classified. Witness testimony altered. Photographs removed. Investigation suddenly ended. So you got to be scratching your head like, why? That is not how a simple hiking accident is handled. You see what I'm saying? It's very weird. Other strange cases in the same region involve, I don't know how to say this. I don't know if it's Mansai or Mansi. I'm going to lean toward Mansai, but I don't know. These Mansai reindeer herders. So they are indigenous Mansai people. They again, being indigenous, they can trace their lineage back, living in the same area for really like thousands of years. They always avoided certain valleys. Reindeer reportedly refused to enter areas, panicked without visible cause, no evidence the Mansai were involved. They were cleared. So these people are, again, they're indigenous, and they know there are certain places that you don't go, and they're like reindeer herders, and they know our animals, our reindeer, act up in these certain areas. We don't go there. So naturally, I'm sure they were looked at, because you have 9 people who are dead and you don't know how to explain it. These people were cleared. They didn't like do anything to them. So again, that happened in 1959. And then later through the 60s and 70s, multiple hikers died in the same mountain range. Some cases involved sudden disorientation, again, undressing, and again, severe trauma. Obviously, it's not necessarily weird for someone to die hiking, especially in a place that's frigid, but it's the circumstances of their deaths that are unexplained. So the common explanations and why they don't work, people would have suggested an avalanche did it, but there's no evidence of an avalanche, and you're going to have evidence of an avalanche if there was one. The tent still standing, that can't work. Injuries are inconsistent. Katabatic winds, I don't know what that word means, explains panic, but it does not explain internal injuries or radiation. Military weapons test is possible, but it leaves questions. Why no blast injuries? Why allow civilians nearby? I wouldn't necessarily rule that out. You know, I don't really put it past any military to care about civilians getting killed. So I wouldn't rule it out because of that. But you do have to question, how would there be no external injuries if it was like military weapons? Infrasound theoretically induces panic, but it doesn't crush ribs. And again, remember the one lady had her tongue removed and soft tissue and stuff like that. So that doesn't make sense. So very strange case. So let me put this down for a second. So when I read that, I'm telling you, because I've been somewhat of a student of some of these unnatural things that have happened to people around the world, much of which has been in America, but around the world, this all rings a bell. I already, as soon as I read about this, I was like, I bet I know what happened. I'm not going to go there yet, but before I get there, I was curious. I was like, I wonder what is the history of this land. So again, they named it Dyatlov Pass after Igor Dyatlov, who was the leader of this hiking group in 1959. But I wondered, what's the history of the land here? Did something happen in this area? Like, what are we looking at? So I wanted to go down that rabbit trail a little bit. So the deep ancient history long before 1959. What makes Dyatlov Pass truly unsettling is that the 1959 incident happened in a place that was already considered dangerous, sacred, and taboo for thousands of years. Let's rewind far back. So this is what I wanted to get to. I was like, there's got to be something that happened at some point that made this place weird. All right. And sure enough. So the Urals, I don't know if I'm saying that right, one of Earth's oldest mountain ranges. They're 250 to 300 million years old. First of all, I take issue with that. I don't believe the Earth is millions of years old. So I don't agree with that. However, that this is coming from the establishment. You know, the education system has pushed evolution. They believe in a very old Earth. So that's why you're getting this. I don't agree. But they have been there for at least thousands of years. So they form a natural boundary between Europe and Asia for tens of thousands of years. Even that I would take issue with. I don't even know that the Earth is tens of thousands of years. I don't even know if it's 10,000 years old. It could be, but I don't know about that. Anyway, this area was a migration corridor, a spiritual boundary. What? A thin place in ancient belief systems. Ancient peoples did not treat the Urals as ordinary land. They treated them as alive. So that begs the question, well, why? Because people don't just make up superstitious stories without reasons, you know? So the first known inhabitants, again, 40,000 plus years ago, I doubt it. But whatever, archaeology shows Paleolithic hunters lived in the Urals as early as 40,000 years ago. Doubtful, but it is old. Sites include cave dwellings, stone tools, animal bone ritual deposits. These early people practiced animism. So that's kind of about mountains, our spirits, wind is a conscious force, forest inhabited by beings. The land was not neutral, it was active. They still believe in animism, like in Japan and stuff, kind of like everything's alive, which technically isn't untrue, but they think like kind of like they give like a spirit to like the earth and stuff like that. It's kind of weird. Anyway, the Mansai people, they were keepers of the old belief. So again, these people are still around. They were the ones in 1959 who, some of which witnessed the orbs in the sky, and also whose reindeer act up in certain places and refuse to enter, and they just panic when there's no visible threat. So they've been around. The Mansai are the most important group here. The timeline, ancestors present in the region 3,000 to 5,000 years ago. Direct descendants still live in the northern Urals today. Like I said, these people can trace their lineage back. They are indigenous. So they know what's up as far as what, you know, what the deal is with land and all that. So their core beliefs, this is before Christianity made its way. The Mansai worldview included the upper world of sky spirits, the middle world of humans, and the lower world, which is chaotic or dangerous beings, which you can tell is almost correct. If you think about it in the context of God being in the third heaven, I think the second heaven is probably the spirit realm where like the Satan primarily is, or demonic beings are. And then we have the lower world, which I think would be earth. However, there's something to be said about the center of the earth, below the earth, kind of where people are. There's a descending the Bible talks about, which kind of seems evil as well. I don't know. You know, people say hell is at the center of the earth. That could be true. It does say, didn't Jesus descend into the lower regions of the earth? And then he preached to the angels in prison. So that could be true, but also, in Revelation, it talks about there's going to be a new heaven and a new earth. So if the old one burns up or is rolled up like a scroll or whatever happens, I forget, Peter talks about it, then if hell is in the old earth, then where's it going to go? You know what I'm saying? So I don't know. That's a question I would love to ask a theologian who knows a lot more than I do. So anyway, they believe mountains are the gateways between these realms. All right. So the sacred mountains and forbidden places, the Mansai name for the mountain near Dyatlov Pass is often translated as Mountain of the Dead, or do not go there. So this was already, like we read at the beginning, this place was considered taboo already, and yet these hikers either didn't know that or didn't believe it, and they went anyway. But somebody at some point figured out you don't want to be going there. Next. So the name predates the 1959 incident. It was not just symbolic, it was a warning. Why places were forbidden? People disappeared. Hunters heard sounds with no source. Reindeer refused to enter certain valleys and apparently still refused to enter certain places as of at least 1959. Sudden storms appeared without warning. These weren't myths for entertainment. They were survival rules. So it was already widely believed among the people who lived in this area, you do not go there because there's something wrong with that place unless you want to get killed or something. You don't go there. And again, there are reasons why they thought that. They didn't just make it up. Hey, we just all decided we're going to pretend that place is evil and we have absolutely zero reason to think that. No, it's based off of real stuff that happened. So what did they worship? They're not gods like Greek mythology, more like powerful entities. So again, I guess this would fall under animism or whatever. Powerful entities. So they believed in a sky father, forest spirits, mountain spirits, which they thought were dangerous. Wind beings could confuse, mislead, or kill. So notice they believe there's something in the wind, which I find interesting. And they said sudden storms would come up unannounced and things like that. So it's like there's probably a reason they thought there was like a spirit in the ground, in the trees, in the weather, because of things, kind of unexpected, unexplained things happening. So they would give offerings, which included animal bones, antlers, carved wooden idols, and metal objects in the later period. So kind of a form of paganism, I guess, since you're giving offerings or like sacrifices, kind of like a pagan thing to do, I would say. Some ritual sites were never entered casually. They were only approached by, what did they have in their culture? Oh, shamans. Interesting. Shamans are part of a lot of different cultures and a lot of different religions, and yet they're all doing essentially the same thing, which is contacting beings and spirits of another realm, something that you shouldn't be doing in any culture, and yet they all do that. So they were accessed during specific seasons. Shamans and the voice of the mountains. So shamans described winds that speak, pressure in the chest, sudden panic, loss of direction, people removing clothing uncontrollably. That last point matters. If you remember, what is the story we started with? That is the 1959 group of hikers who cut their tent from the inside, and they found bodies with partial clothing removed, and nobody would do that, and especially not an experienced hiker or someone who knows, again, you can be pretty stupid and know that it's cold outside and you don't want to be barefoot. You don't want to be without clothes. Like, that's like common sense. So the paradoxal undressing appears in ancient shamanic warnings long before modern medicine named it. So this was like already a thing. And again, did people listen to the Mansai people when the 1959 incident happened? No. So I'm sure they wrote them off as crazy and superstitious, which is kind of the attitude everybody has when somebody starts talking about, nah, there's like something evil here. There's something in the air. You don't want to go there. Everybody writes it off as you're nuts. Unless, if you are a Bible believing Christian with a supernatural worldview, then you understand demons are real. And sometimes they are in a certain place, depending on what's been done there. If blood has been spilled, if people have been doing rituals, making sacrifices, people invite spirits in by their activity. So you can't dismiss this stuff as these people are nuts. So anyway, stone structures and anomalies across the northern Urals, stone stacks, which are non-natural, meaning somebody made them, circular formations, idol posts aligned with solstices. That right there I find very interesting. Aligning with solstices is, I don't know how people in antiquity figured that out. You had to have some kind of way of mapping things, because same with the so-called Indian mounds and some of these megalithic sites, they point, they're lined up exactly with lunar events and stuff like that, and people just didn't have the knowledge and the know-how back then that we have now. So how was this done when you guys are messing around with rocks and like chisels, and yet you figured out how to align things with a solstice? There's some kind of what's the word? What is the word? Sophistication that's involved there that's beyond the ability typically of the people living there at the time. No disrespect to them, they just didn't have it. Anyway, dead zones where animals avoid grazing. Animal instincts are interesting. They can oftentimes pick up on things that people miss. I'll get into that. These are not fully excavated because of the remote location, the indigenous resistance, and Soviet-era suppression of superstition. Like I said, again, kind of probably dismissed as you people are crazy, but it's interesting that all that stuff is there. Next. Why this matters for Dyatlov, here's the uncomfortable overlap. So the ancient accounts record Forbidden Mountain. That's where they camped in the 1959 incident. The ancients talked about sudden terror. In 59, the tent was cut from the inside. Wind-induced panic, and there you see calm footprints. Internal injuries in the ancient accounts, and then in 59, they also had internal injuries with no external wounds. Radiation taboo areas, radioactive clothing, animals avoid valleys, and then in 59 you still have reindeer refusals. So it's interesting, radiation wasn't like a thing thousands of years ago as far as people are concerned. I don't know when that was like someone figured that out. Actually, let's see if I can find out real quick. Yeah. So it really in the very, very late 1800s, almost 1900, was when they had an understanding of what radiation actually is and how dangerous it can be. So that being said, nobody had like radioactive weapons. No humans had radioactive weapons thousands of years ago to be able to use on other people. So this doesn't prove a cause, but it destroys the idea that this place was historically ordinary. So it's obviously already weird, and yet unfortunately these hikers found out, like the hard way. Next. Soviet erasure of indigenous knowledge. So the USSR suppressed shamanism, which is a good thing in my opinion because it's the occult. They reframed sacred places as empty wilderness. They ignored indigenous warnings. The hikers were never told the mountain was taboo. So that's interesting, is that they didn't know better, so they probably just thought, well, this is like we want to hike. Obviously you're going to go to a mountain, and yet they just picked one that was an unfortunate choice. So the hard truth, for thousands of years, people who lived closest to Dyatlov Pass believed some places are not meant for humans. Nature there does not behave normally. Entering without ritual or permission is dangerous. You don't have to accept spirits or entities to acknowledge this, that long-term human survival cultures do not invent forbidden zones without reason. That's the thing, is we're all very quick, it seems like, to dismiss the superstitions of these ancient cultures and just write them off as like, well, they were, they didn't know anything. But is that really fair? Why do we take them seriously about all the other things that they were able to establish that kept them going and they survived and all this stuff, some of which we've piggybacked off of and we use today. And yet when it comes to these type of things, we're like, oh, they were nuts. Well, I don't think that's fair. So below is clear evidence-based breakdown of how and why the Soviet authorities suppressed information and abruptly shut down investigation into Dyatlov Pass without resorting to exaggeration or folklore. So I was like studying this, and I wanted to know what the Soviet government did to suppress this investigation or whatever. So it wasn't stopped, or I'm sorry, it was stopped. It was not concluded. The timeline, obviously this happened in February of 1959. And again, it's just hikers dying like on a mountain. So you'd think you'd have a normal investigation, but that wasn't the case. The bodies were found from February to May of 1959. Remember, they found group 1 before group 2. Once snow melted, they found group 2. The case was closed abruptly with no reconstruction, no reenactment, and no causal chain. I'm sorry. You would think the families would be very upset about this. The final report did not answer why the tent was cut from the inside, why half were severely injured, why radiation was present, why eyewitness reports of lights were ignored. Instead, the closing line stated the hikers died due to the influence of a compelling unknown force. How can that be your official report, and how can people accept that? You know what I'm saying? Unless they know what I know, which I'll share with you when I get to the end of this. The hikers died. So instead, the closing line stated the hikers died due to the influence of a compelling unknown force. I think I just read that. That phrase is real and documented and legally meaningless. In Soviet criminal procedure, that wording allowed, give me 1 second and I will pull this up. Here. So that wording allowed no further inquiry, no responsibility, and no public accountability. But the area was immediately restricted, which you ought to think is the second suspect thing about this. After the case, the region was closed to hikers for 3 years. No civilian expeditions allowed. Maps were altered or reclassified. Local man-side access was limited. So even the indigenous people living up there with their reindeer, they were like, we're even going to control where we allow you guys to go. So this is not standard protocol for a hiking accident. If someone, let me just say this. So there's a place in, I think it's technically North Carolina, called Pilot Mountain. And if you drive down 77, if you're headed to the Carolinas, the beach or something, you can see it from the road because it's got a hump on it. So you can see it in the daylight. You can see, if it's dusk, you can see the outline of it from the road. My family, we used to live in South Carolina, but one of the times as we were probably between South Carolina and Ohio, we stopped there at Pilot Mountain, and we got on it, and there's actually, you can see the remnants of a ladder. So at one point in time, there was a ladder. You could climb up it and you could get up onto the hump of Pilot Mountain. Now it's not there anymore. There's just the remnants of it. And the guide told us that they took it away because of people falling off and dying. So that being said, pretty much there's a local place here where people used to go sled riding down a big hill. Well, they closed it to the public, I think because some people got hurt or something like that. So it's not weird to close an area. If you had 9 hikers die, I don't think it's weird that they would close off the area to hikers necessarily. It's simply because as a government, you don't want more people going up there and getting killed, because you're then gonna, even if they wanted to, even if they like got past some kind of barricade or something you had up, you're still gonna take heat because somebody's gonna be grieving and they're gonna be upset that you didn't take action when 9 people died up there. It's almost like the movie Jaws. Remember, someone got attacked by a shark. The mayor of the town didn't want to close the beach, and then some boy gets killed, and then the mom goes and approaches the sheriff, and she's mad at him. She slaps him in the face. I can't believe you didn't close the beaches when you knew there was a shark in the water. So even though he wanted to close them, he got overruled by the mayor. They kept them open. Someone else died. So you're going to get in trouble if even if it was a freak accident and it shouldn't have happened. As a government, I understand 9 people die. You might take some precautions to keep other people from going up there. However, let's keep reading. So the USSR routinely allowed mountaineering even after fatal incidents. So here we see they're making allowances after some accidents or incidents where people apparently died, but not after this one, which is why there's an inconsistency here. This case is treated differently. Closures were typically reserved for military testing, industrial contamination, or classified infrastructure. Witness testimony was quietly neutralized. Searchers reported orange orbs in the sky, unusual light patterns, sounds without visible sources. I hope if you've been following me or anybody like me, this stuff is probably ringing a bell at this point, or at least I would kind of hope it is, because it's a lot of the stuff I've talked about quite a bit. We'll tie it together. So what happened next? The witness statements were edited. That's always smells like a cover-up. Some testimonies disappeared from the final file. Again, you got something to hide for some reason. Others were rephrased to remove interpretation. No formal explanation was provided for why lights were logged, why they were later ignored. This matches known KGB practices. Do not deny, do not explain, just reclassify and redirect. So yeah, I mean, can you trust the KGB? No. That's why when it comes to Hitler's supposed skull fragment, you know, the report that Hitler shot himself in the bunker, that was reported by the KGB, I believe, and they were the ones who produced the skull fragment, which we now know could not have been Hitler's because it's a female. It comes from a female skull, and it was probably in its 20s at the time of death. Now, that doesn't mean that Hitler did not shoot himself and take a cyanide pill and die in the bunker in Berlin. That all could still have happened. It only means the skull fragment that the KGB presented is not Hitler's. But it does make you suspect of the whole story, because if they lied about one thing, kind of makes you wonder what else they lied about. I don't personally believe that Hitler escaped via the rat lines and made it into Argentina. I do think he died in Berlin. I could be wrong. I could absolutely be wrong. There may be way more to that than we know. I just haven't seen anything that has convinced me yet. If evidence comes forward, I can be convinced. I just am not there yet. Next. Radiation was downgraded, then buried. So the key facts: clothing from 2 hikers showed elevated beta radiation. Both had worked at nuclear-related facilities. Radiation was localized, not environmental. Instead of investigating, the report mentions it briefly, and then no follow-up tests were ordered. So I can see at this point if someone's thinking this was like there was maybe a secret government program and there was like a radiation leak and they covered up this whole story because they don't want to be on the hook for people dying because of some, you know, maybe secret military experiment gone wrong. That's one conspiracy. I don't personally think that's the case. I'll tell you what I do think happened here, but I'm going to finish reading before we get there. So no contamination pathway was proposed. This is abnormal even by 1950s standards. Why? Because the USSR had ongoing weapons and propulsion testing in the Urals at the time. Propulsion testing I find interesting. Evidence handling violated Soviet procedure. Multiple deviations from standard protocol. Photos were missing from the archive. Bodies buried before full forensic consensus. Is that not what still happens? Like the kid who took a shot Trump in the ear got cremated like right away before anybody could really do any kind of testing, an autopsy, anything. No independent review board. Autopsy reports contradicted each other. One examiner wrote, the injuries resemble high energy trauma. So again, with that being said, I could see why people would then accept, you know, the military was probably testing some high tech they had that was not made available to the public. Something went wrong and they don't want to be on the hook for it. So they covered this whole thing up because they don't want to be on the hook for civilians getting killed when they were up to something that was top secret. That's I guess possible, but I still don't think so. I don't blame people if they lean toward that, though, because this whole thing stinks. Another wrote, there were no signs of violence. These cannot both be true. Yeah, there can't be high energy trauma and no violence at the same time. You know what I'm saying? So instead of resolving the contradiction, the file was just closed. So the indigenous knowledge was also excluded on purpose. It's amazing how they didn't want to talk to the people who know the area the best. You know, it's kind of interesting. The man side, they warned against the area. They had names for forbidden mountains. They reported animal avoidance and sudden storms. Official action, the man side were investigated first as suspects. They were cleared quickly, then ignored entirely. Why? Because Soviet ideology. They rejected animism and shamanism, which, again, I think are good things. But you do need to kind of talk to the locals that know the area. And if they say something that you think is weird, why don't you look into it? They classified it as superstition. They actively erased indigenous spiritual geography, which again is presumptuous and even almost arrogant. And you can't do that. If you're trying to get to the truth, then you can't be biased. If you want the truth, you can't let bias get in the way. So that might mean you have to accept something as fact that you're uncomfortable with being true. But yet, if you're going to be honest and get to the truth, you're going to have to try to put your bias aside. So next. That erased context that might have mattered. Well, I'll say if they already were saying, yeah, you don't want to go there, animals even know, and yet that was, you know, they again didn't count their word as anything. That kind of, that right there can tell you kind of exactly what happened if you're willing to listen to the people who already knew you don't want to go in there. So the 2020 reopening was damage control. They reopened this case in 2020. In 2020, Russia reopened the case and concluded avalanche, which is a retarded, impossible explanation. The problems, the tent was not buried and the footprints remain visible. Again, if an avalanche comes through, you're not going to see any of that stuff. And I guarantee you wouldn't have found the bodies as quickly as you did either, at least for group one. Doesn't make sense. The injuries don't match slab avalanche trauma. No avalanche debris documented. So what a stupid explanation to even throw out there when everything refutes it. Why reopen it 61 years later? Because the case refused to die. International scrutiny increased. Russia wanted a natural explanation on record. They were surprised they would want that. The avalanche theory solved a PR problem, not the evidence. So why suppress it instead of explain? 3 realistic Soviet motivations, but not mutually exclusive. One is the military secrecy, which again, I don't blame people if they read about this and that's their first, assumption. It's not a bad one. Missile tests, experimental propulsion, high altitude detonations, classified aerospace activity. So I get how, you could make those things fit for at least some of the strange things that happened. But again, in order to go with that one, I guess it's just a very strange coincidence then that the indigenous people, well before the military had any of these things, they already knew you don't go to this place because it's weird and weird stuff happens. So you have to dismiss them entirely, because if you don't, now you've got a coincidence on your hands that people are going to ask about. So I don't think that fits. Second option, nuclear embarrassment, radioactive contamination, worker exposure links, civilian casualties near test zones. Now, that would be reason enough to want to cover something up and close a case or an investigation and just, shut it down. But again, it cannot answer all of the strange details concerning what happened in 1959. And again, you've got the indigenous, the history of the land as a problem as well. So the third one, loss of narrative control, unknown force undermines state authority, public fear was unacceptable, mystery invites speculation. The USSR did not tolerate unsolved public anonymity. So again, this is the Soviet Union. So of course they're kind of still that way. We'll tell you what to think, and we don't want to hear, you're just going to comply and go along with it. So nothing's really changed there. Second thing, reindeer deaths and disappearances are reported. Oh, so this is, I think I asked a different question here as I was looking into this. I asked, did anything else strange? We obviously have the ancient things that people reported. We have the 1959 incident, which we're talking about. We had people disappear since then throughout the 60s and 70s. But I was asking, have other things disappeared other than people or animals? Have other things disappeared in the same region? So, or wait a minute, wait. Let me back up before I read this. What I asked about, I did ask about that, if other things had disappeared, and the answer is mostly no. There have been some small planes that have disappeared, although they were found later, and they think that was due to weather. So I accept that. There have been some strange things where things were found where they shouldn't have been, meaning, so let's say someone had a campsite and they went missing. They found the person, died, and they can explain natural cause, hypothermia, avalanche, something, but their stuff was found in a place where it wasn't left. So there are some other strange things like that, but none of them as big of a case as what happened in 1959. Now, the other thing I inquired about was, since I know there have been reindeer up in this area and they've reacted, we're not going to go in a certain valley. We panic out of nowhere when there's no visible threat. And then given what happened to the one woman that was part of the hiking party who had her tongue removed and some stuff in soft tissue, I asked, have cattle mutilations been reported in this area? So here's the answer. So reindeer deaths and disappearances are reported among the Mansai and neighboring Nanit/Komai groups. Oral histories and ethnographic records describe repeated patterns of reindeer found dead with no signs of predation, which is kind of what happens in cattle mutilations. Animals vanishing entirely from herds. That could, I'll give you some leeway there. That could be something else. Reindeer refusing to enter specific valleys or slopes. Again, animals have instincts. They pick up on things people don't sometimes. Sudden panic or stampede at night. Probably something causes that. I don't think animals just jump out of their skin for no reason. Unless you have a cat, they do that because they're paranoid psychos. Carcasses avoided by scavengers. That is like ding, ding, ding. That is, that's a cattle mutilation detail. And I'll explain. If you don't know what cattle mutilations are, I promise I'll tell you. So, important distinction. These accounts predate the 1959 Dyatlov incident by centuries. I don't care about when this happened. I wanted to know if cattle mutilations, or I guess they're not cattle, reindeer, animal mutilations have happened in this area. And apparently in some cases, sounds like they kind of did. So were their mutilation-like features not consistently in the U.S. sense, but there are overlaps. Some documented similarities, lack of struggle. That's exactly what happens in cattle mutilations. No tracks around the carcasses in the snow. Exactly what happens. No footprints around the carcasses on ranches. No disturbed ground. Not even drops of blood. And scavengers won't go near them, and neither will the other cattle when this happens. Organs missing without obvious tearing. Not always noted which organs are missing in cattle mutilations. No blood pooling. Again, no drops of blood. Herd animals behaving abnormally beforehand. Another thing ranchers and farmers have reported before, like the day before or the night before, then they find one of their calves or cows has been mutilated. Key differences: no standardized autopsies. Findings recorded are oral warnings, not forensic files. Obviously, if this is going back hundreds or thousands of years, I wouldn't expect them to be as organized journalistically or scientifically as we are today. So that detail doesn't matter. The Forbidden Valleys connection. Several valleys near and north of Dyatlov Pass were considered spirit inhabited, dangerous, off limits for herding. Reasons given, repeated across centuries, animals don't return. They fall without wounds. The wind makes them mad. Meat is not safe. That last line matters. And predator kills, meat is consumed. In disease, carcasses are obvious. In these stories, the animal is simply wrong. So I could go on about this whole incident. I could go on about the history of the place. There was a little more to it that I didn't include, but I gave you the gist of it. And the reason why I asked the questions I did is because the details of what happened in 1959 sound to me like there's involvement of UFOs. There's involvement of aliens. Why? The tent being cut from the inside. When people get abducted, they are abducted from the inside of their house, and they go through a window without even opening the window themselves. It's not even open for them, but they're in. The point is they're inside. They go outside. One guy, Emil Jurek, he kept getting taken when he was a little kid from his bedroom, and you know what his parents did? They put a lock on the outside of his door so he couldn't get out of his room because he kept saying something is coming and taking me, and he was physically gone. So what they did is they put a lock on the door on the outside so he couldn't get to it, and still they found him outside the house the next morning, and he could not have possibly physically gotten out of his room. So something took him from the inside of his room and got him outside of the house without going through the door or going through the locked windows. So we have something that's defying reality here. It's defying physics. So that's the first thing, the weird thing with the tent. Second thing, the paradoxical undressing. Again, when people are abducted, there's always the removal of clothing. Why? Because what's being done is usually an experiment on people where they're taking sperm from men and ovum from women. And this, I think, is just their breeding program, which is Genesis 6 in modernity. Same thing all over again. So that's strange. The radiation on some of the clothing, I'm telling you, radiation has been picked up on animal carcasses that have been that are cattle that have been mutilated. They have a little device, I forget the name of it. They've waved it over these dead carcasses and they've picked up radiation. That doesn't make sense with a dead cow or a calf or a sheep or whatever it is. Doesn't make sense, and yet it's happened. Dr. Marzulli did a video, a documentary on cattle mutilations. It's dark, especially if you're not familiar with the topic. It's dark, but you should watch it. It's all factual, and he talked to ranchers and farmers who've reported this stuff. And I'll get into cattle mutilations more in a second. But anyway, radiation has also been found on victims of, again, alien abductions. I don't believe they're aliens. I believe it's nothing more than fallen angels and demonic entities that are taking people, and they're doing this breeding that they've been doing since Genesis 6. It's the same exact thing. We just now have different vocabulary for it, but people are gone in real time. So radiation has been, in fact, people that have been abducted, Karen Wilkinson being one of them, she has like health complications now. She got abducted from the time she was like 5 or 6, and it went on into her at least 20s. And she's got health complications now as a result of that. Radiation seems to be involved, to say nothing of the fact crop circles. There's evidence when they're bent. Obviously, if you have stalks that are short enough, you can get some boards and string and you can bend them and you can make shapes. Technically, you can do it if the stalks are short enough, if you know what you're doing, and if you have hours and hours of time ahead of you. You also kind of need an aerial view, which is not impossible today. But so you can maybe account for some that somebody pulled some elaborate prank, but for crop circles that are massive and the corn stalks are 8 feet tall or so, you cannot bend them without breaking them. And people who've studied it have found the like nodes on the stalks or whatever they are like blown out, like the equivalent of some type of radiation, almost like microwave waves or some type of thing that has hit them and they can tell it's something happened here, and some two drunk guys in an English pub didn't just go out and do this in the middle of the night. There's no way. So anyway, radiation, also a common thing when it comes to, UFO alien activity. The lady they found with her tongue removed and soft tissue, that is what happens in cow mutilations. They remove tongues, they remove organs. There's not a drop of blood on the ground. There's no blood on the outside of the carcass. These things are removed with surgical precision. Other animals won't go near them, even scavengers, like the Mansai reported with the reindeer, won't go near them. And then the whole thing with, the orbs in the sky that people reported, and quickly the Russians closed the case. We don't want to include that. We don't want anyone asking about that. Many ranchers and farmers who have reported cattle mutilations have seen lights in the sky the night before, or the night before the morning they find their cattle have been mutilated. So that's a common thing. Even when it comes to unexpected storms, or sudden changes in the weather, like the Mansai reported, or the sudden panic, and then the animals not behaving normally, refusing to go into a certain valley, that to me, that speaks of demonic manipulation of the weather, which again we know happened in the Bible, that demonic storm that Jesus rebuked it and it stopped. Animals, another thing, when people have had cattle mutilations, some of them have seen UFOs beforehand, and many of them have said their dogs have gone berserk. Even if they didn't see a UFO, they're like, well, now that I'm being asked about it, my dog went nuts and I don't know why. Animals can pick up on when there's like a demon around. I'm telling you, I want to be careful what I say. I have a Saint Bernard, and this was years ago. And I want to be careful what I say because this is public. Not that I would expect it to get to anybody, but let's just say a member of my family knew a guy who this member of my family was like, that guy has demons. You can tell in his eyes. So long story short, my dog happened to be in the vicinity of this person one time. And my Saint Bernard is the chillest. He sleeps like 23 hours a day. He doesn't growl. What he does now that he's old, he's almost 11, he groans, but he doesn't growl. If he's playing with my basset hound and they're kind of rough housing, he'll sort of growl if there's a toy in his mouth, but he has never been a dog that's like growled. In fact, I think he was probably at least 5 at this point. I had heard him growl maybe one time in his life, and I have had him since he was 8 weeks old. So he was in the vicinity of this guy who this member of my family thought had demons, and he was not facing this person. I had him on a leash, and I didn't know that guy was there. All of a sudden, my dog started growling, and I thought, what is this about? I'm his world. He's not growling at me. He's in love with me. Like, what is this? So I turn around and I happen to see that guy, and he wasn't coming toward us or anything. So it wasn't like a protective measure. He wasn't looking at us. We weren't looking at him. My dog had turned around and started growling. And I'm telling you, there were other people around. So I thought, that's interesting. And so I think my dog picked up on something. That guy actually was demon possessed. Animals can oftentimes sense that, and they go berserk. They go nuts. Another guy, I wish I could remember his name. Dr. Marzulli interviewed him years ago. He was abducted when he was a teenager, and he ended up on a metal table like everybody does pretty much, many of which don't remember it, or they just remember bits and pieces of it, but he remembered it pretty well. Ended up on a table. They did something to him, and he ended up with this pain in his side. His flesh was just like burning. And it lasted for a while. But anyway, he said he saw a UFO in the sky. It was broad daylight. He saw it in the sky, and his dog, I don't think was with him the first time, and he actually was taken. But then later on, after he'd been taken once, people who've been taken, they know when it's coming. They say there's like a I don't know if I call it a vibration. There's like a frequency, almost like a droning or a humming sound. And they know, you start to feel a certain way. They know what's coming. They know it's coming. So he started feeling that way. And he's like, there's got to be one around here because it's coming. And wouldn't you know it, his dog starts going nuts before anything was in sight. And he ended up getting taken again. So that being said, with the reindeer in this particular region acting up, and again, this goes back thousands of years, well before the 1959 hiker incident. So they knew something was up in this particular place. That's why that's taboo. That in their culture, those indigenous people, that's taboo. You don't go there. There's something like alive. There's something not right. It's not safe for humans. It's not safe for animals either. So I am guessing with all of the circumstances concerning this, the death and disappearance of these hikers, that again, now, why would the Russian government, which I understand it was the USSR at the time, but why would they cover it up and be so hush hush about it? I understand why people would jump to the conclusion, well, they were doing testing with military weapons, and they had civilian casualties. So that's why they put the lid on it. Don't ask questions. The autopsies are going to be conflicting, but we're just going to bury it. That would make sense if you could account for all the other details, which you can't, if it's just military testing. Now, I do believe the governments of the world know exactly what UFOs are. I think, like I said in part one, I think many of the UFOs that people see are our own stuff because of the testimony of Bob Lazar in the 90s. His job was to back and engineer the propulsion system of these crashed UFOs that they've retrieved. And he's never changed his story as far as I know. I can't believe he's alive still. But I think he's telling the truth. And then you've had that, was it David Barber? I think was his name. He's demon possessed, you can tell. In fact, he said he encountered an entity and something came on the inside of him. I'm like, yeah, bro, I can tell looking at your eyes. You got something in you. But his job was to work. He worked for a retrieval program. You had David Grush sit before Congress going on, what's that been? At least 2 years now, I think. Nancy Mace is asking him about UFOs, and she said, have biologics come with any of these retrievals? And he said, yes. And she said, human or non-human? And he said, non-human. And this is a congressional hearing. So we're beyond conspiracy theories now. It's a real thing. But I just think the agenda is to get everybody to buy that it's aliens. I don't believe they're aliens. I believe you have people high up in government, the United States being one of them, who've made deals with evil entities, which are nothing more than fallen angels of whatever type, or demonic entities. And in exchange for access to people, we've gotten technology from them, which is why we now have our own UFOs, which are our government weapons or vehicles. In fact, again, 1959 in the USSR, do you know why Operation Paperclip happened? If you don't know what that is, that's a real program. The CIA it's not a conspiracy theory. The CIA has admitted that we know this happened. Operation Paperclip was the United States government said, we will take Nazi scientists, all of which should have been killed for war crimes. But no, we made allowances to bring Nazi scientists over to the United States. And the reasoning behind it is the president at the time said, well, we're in a race against the Soviets. Yeah, we may have had to partner with them to defeat the Nazi Germany, but we really are not on good terms with them. We can't trust them. They don't trust us. We're in a race against the Soviets to get to the tech that Nazi Germany had. Therefore, we can justify bringing Nazi scientists over here, and we're going to appoint them, NASA, Werner Von Braun became like high up in NASA, if not the highest up Nazi scientist, and many others. So we brought him over, and it was supposed, I forget who the president even was at the time. It was supposed to, we were supposed to not take anyone who was guilty of war crimes, but we did anyway. And so the reason for it is Nazi Germany, if you don't know, Hitler was into the occult, and he consulted with mediums. They were sniffing around in Argentina. There's actually New Schwabenland, which if you Google that, Google will tell you that's a conspiracy theory, but it's not. New Schwabenland is a real place in did I say Argentina? I meant Antarctica. I'm sorry. Well, Nazis were sniffing around in Argentina to get away. But before that happened, Antarctica is where New Schwabenland is. And it's a Nazi base. I don't know what's left of it now. I think they're probably still running something there. I think there's a lot in Antarctica that may get uncovered. There's a whole bunch of suspect. I've talked about that in an episode too. Suspect stuff in Antarctica. But anyway, so the Nazis were looking for something called the Vril, which was supposedly like an energy source of some kind that could power UFOs and advanced weapons. So they were looking underground, which I find interesting. And so there's this is where it gets a little bit muddy, and I'm not sure what all I believe. But given that Hitler was into the occult and he was consorting with mediums or consulting them, makes me think you're dabbling with evil entities. So again, it tracks biblically. The Watchers, the fallen angels in Genesis 6, which abandoned their positions, they came down. They not only corrupted mankind sexually and created the Nephilim, the giants, as the offspring of that, but they also taught different things to human beings and corrupted humanity in more ways than just one. So it would stand to reason that now, if you get into the occult and you start to consult with evil spirits, you're going to tap into some kind of knowledge that's beyond what humans have, because you're talking to something that's of the spirit realm. It goes beyond the natural. It goes beyond the laws of physics and all of that. So Hitler was into that. So here's where the conspiracies come in, that Nazi Germany had UFOs, like flying saucer type UFOs. How did they get them? Did they make them? If they did, what kind of tech did they have to make them? So that's what we were in a race to get to against the Soviets. Therefore, Operation Paperclip was allowed. So that being said, do I think the U.S., we're the only ones who knew about this higher tech Nazi Germany had managed to get their hands on? No, obviously the Soviets knew about it too. So if you fast forward to 1959 and you have these hikers who died in the mountains with suspect circumstances that can't be explained, I don't think it was just the KGB up to something or the USSR up to something. Now, I wouldn't be surprised if they also have advanced weapons just like we do that have not been made public. They probably have their own UFOs by now that have been back and engineered from either crash retrievals or somehow else they've gotten their hands on them. Somebody dabbling in the occult and talking to spirits and making deals, probably. But I would venture to say the government of Russia knew exactly what happened to those hikers. And one, they either gave permission, which I think President Eisenhower did with us at Holloman Air Force Base, when he went missing. And that's a conspiracy theory. Did he actually go meet with some kind of entities and make a deal? I think he did. I think that's why people disappear from national parks. And the circumstances of those disappearances are weird too. What are their clothes doing folded? Why is the scent gone like that? Like with who's the guy we just did in a couple episodes back, Brian Chen or whatever his name, Mark, I forget his name. So if our government did that, I wouldn't put it past Russia China, any other world powers have probably done the same thing. I'm sure they've been approached by the same demonic entities that we have, and you have evil people high up in probably every government. That's why there's globalism. That's why somebody, the Antichrist can't rise to power without people being involved. So we know that's coming. We know the global stage is set. We know that the same way God needs people to get on board with what God wants done on the earth. He works through the church of Jesus, the body. Satan needs people to get on board with what he wants to do, which is why there are people who are Satanists and demon possessed, and they're doing things at the devil's instruction. So I think the Russian government knew what happened to the hikers. I think they probably, this was UFO activity. That explains the orbs in the sky. That explains the tongue of the woman being removed and the soft tissue. To get back to cattle mutilations, if you don't know what those are, that's when, I think maybe I explained it, but a rancher or a farmer, somebody who owns cattle, they will find a cow or a calf, could even be a sheep or something, dead in the pasture. All the other animals are away from it, the rest of the cattle. Scavengers, more often than not, will not go near it. And I'm talking like coyotes and scavengers that'll eat anything, don't even want anything to do with it. They've picked up radiation with these little instruments they've waved over them. They're drained of blood more often than not. They've taken reproductive organs, they've taken tongues, they've taken eyes, all of which is done with surgical precision. There's never any drops of blood around the carcass or on the carcass. There are no tire tracks. There are no footprints. There's no sign of a predator attacking. And so law enforcement doesn't know what to do with these cases. They've happened all over the country, Oregon, Texas. In fact, it happened to one of my grandparents' neighbors. They had a cattle mutilation, a calf. So they can't explain it, because every explanation they've presented doesn't work. So cattle mutilations are in a category of their own. They can't be explained. I'm sure there have been attempts to dismiss them, but none of them work. Same with what the Soviets tried with this incident in 1959. Well, we'll try to explain it. It was an avalanche. That's a retarded explanation that cannot account for internal injuries with no external wounds. How is somebody's rib cage crushed and there's not a bruise on the outside of their body? Why is this chick missing her tongue? Why is their soft tissue gone? Why'd they remove their clothes? Why'd they cut the tent from the inside? Why were there orbs in the sky right before this happened? Why is it the same exact area where the indigenous people can trace it back thousands of years? Yeah, that's a taboo area. You don't go in there because it's weird, and people go missing and people die and animals get messed up. Our reindeer have also had the same thing happen well before 1959, also missing organs, and there's no blood pooling or anything. They get spooked out of nowhere. They stampede out of nowhere. So clearly there's something going on there that's not natural. So I think that's what it is. I think this whole 1959 Dyatlov Pass happened as a result of UFO activity, fallen angels, demonic spirits of whatever. I understand there's a proper way to define them. I don't know anything about demonology. I don't know what the difference is between a demon, a fallen angel, or a spirit. I don't think they're all the same, but they have the same origin, but they have different roles. Probably there's a hierarchy to it. But I think that's what this is. These are obviously evil beings of some kind that are messing with humanity, that are also messing with animals. Dr. Marzulli is the one who pieced together the UFO abductions and cattle mutilations. He was the first one to propose. So you can use bovine blood in human transfusions. I think the medical community has tried to walk back on that, but it's still true. So that would explain the cattle mutilations. Why would you be taking reproductive organs, bovine blood, and things from a cow? At the same time, you're abducting people, and people are getting pregnant, and they get taken again in the third month, and suddenly the fetus is gone. And the woman goes to the doctor, and they say, we can't find any evidence you were pregnant. Are you sure that you were? And they're always like, yep, it was confirmed by my doctor. Now all of a sudden It's gone after I got taken again. So Dr. Marzulli thinks the bovine blood and the reproductive organs of the cattle that they're mutilating are being taken to create artificial wombs, so that when the fetus is taken again in the 3rd month, they have like a gestation tank for it because it can't survive outside the womb at 3 months. Which, again, I know it sounds crazy, but it's Genesis 6 in modernity. And what does the Bible tell us? As it was in the days of Noah, so will it be in the coming of the Son of Man. Meaning, the stuff you saw going on in the days of Noah, you will see going on in the days when the Son of Man is ready to return, which we're on the cusp of. Well, there was a lot going on in the days of Noah. We know God's not sending another flood. We know rampant wickedness was around going on today. But we also know that's when the sons of God, the fallen angels, came into the daughters of men, and they had children by them, which were the Nephilim, which were not human. They were hybrid beings. And obviously, I've seen people argue against that. They're like, angels can't have sex with human beings. That's not true. Because in the book of later on in Genesis, well, Genesis 6 tells you exactly what happened. But if you keep reading, in Genesis, I think it's 18, when Abraham, it says he sees 3 men walk up to him and he makes them a meal. They eat the food that he gives them. So there's a physical component there. And then 2 of them leave and they go to Sodom, where Abraham's nephew Lot is. And they're like, God's going to burn this place to the ground because it's full of wickedness. So how about you and your family get out? Well, Lot brings them into his house for the night. And what happens? The wicked men of the city, who are a bunch of homos, surround the house. And they said, Lot, bring out those men who are in your house. We want to have sex with them. So clearly, these angels looked like men, and all the homos in the city wanted to hook up. And Lot said no. And then the angels, strike them with blindness. They wear themselves out, groping for the door. And then the next day, the angels, the men, which are angels, take Lot and his family that will go out of the city. And God rains down sulfur and fire, and everyone gets destroyed, which is like now where the Dead Sea is, which is full of salt, and there's sulfur there, and nothing can grow there. God really destroyed it. So anyway, there's a physical and even sexual component when angels manifest in the physical, which again is true of fallen angels as well. I know it sounds crazy, but if you'll give yourself a chance to study these things, you'll find that the abductions are real. It's a lot more widespread than you would like to think. You'll find the missing pregnancies are real. Brett Baer, or however you say his name, the Fox News guy, who's one of the least like sensational people I've listened to. He's like as cut and dried as they come. He did a little show on the missing pregnancies, the people who say, I got taken by things I can only describe as aliens. I got violated. I got pregnant. And then 3 months in, I'm taken again. And now the fetus is gone. So it's a real thing. I know it's hard to take if it's the first time you've heard about it. I was in the same boat, but it's been over 10 years for me now. So I'm like not shocked by it anymore. I've made peace with the fact it's crazy, but it's going on. It's disturbing, but it's going on. So that's the Dyatlov Pass. I don't know what's gone on there since the 70s. I don't know if anyone goes up there. I would venture to say if you're Russian, if you're anywhere near the area, you're probably aware. If they reopened that case in 2020, I'd venture to say Russian people know about it. I didn't know about it because I'm not Russian. But I'd venture to say a lot of them know about it. I don't know if people go up there now. I could have looked that up, but I didn't. I assume the indigenous, the Mansai people are still there. I don't know what the government's doing up there. If it's a spiritual, if it's a charged area, like a spiritual hotspot, I bet you anything the Russian government's military's got something there, which if they did in 1959, they've probably got even more established now. It's funny that where there seems to be an increase in UFO activity and sightings, there's always a military base nearby or some kind of entity like that. Look in Arizona, in places like that, there's a lot of UFO activity in a certain place, military base nearby. Even Mount Herman, which is, I'd say, the OG of the portal, if you will, between the spirit realm and the natural world, is Mount Herman. That's where the Watchers descended in the book of Enoch when they came down into the earth to corrupt mankind and do what they did. And yet Mount Herman is also where the base of it is, where Caesarea Philippi is right there. That's where Jesus went, and he said, I'll build my church and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. He says it right there. That's also at the base there is the cave of Pan, where there's running water. People would throw their pagan sacrifices down there. It's a charged geographical area. It's a hot spot for supernatural activity, dark supernatural activity. And it also, who's got a base up there on Mount Herman, who's got a little building doing God knows what? The UN. Yeah. So what are they doing there of all places? Well, the UN, they're up there with the World Economic Forum when it comes to being some of the biggest pushers for globalism, which is going to establish the Antichrist system. So you got to wonder what they're consorting with up there on a very charged hotspot. There's always a base nearby, seems like, which tells you get high enough up in the military, they know exactly what it is that they're messing with. They know these are, I doubt any of them think they're aliens. I bet you get up high enough, these are like demonic spirits of some kind. I guarantee you the highest scientists over at CERN in Switzerland, they know what they're talking to. They know. I bet you there are staff there who are much lower down. They don't know, but the people high enough, they know what they're doing. They're making deals. They're making agreements. I guarantee you they're giving access in exchange for tech, and God knows what else. So it only makes sense because the Antichrist is going to be, dominating all aspects of society. One world military, one world government, one world religion, one world currency. So naturally they've got to have their hands in everything. It's going to be you can't buy or sell without the mark of the beast. That's economy, which I think is also going to be healthcare, based on what Bill Gates and people like that are saying, what they're doing with vaccines. So it's not, if you're familiar with Bible prophecy, all of this stuff really starts to make sense. It sounds crazy if you try to separate what's going on from the Bible, but if you'll look at it through the lens of Scripture, everything kind of falls into place, and you're like, I can kind of see where this is going, especially if you understand Genesis 3:15, which Dr. Marzulli, Rick Renner, and lots of people say is the gateway to the Bible, because it's where, it is the first prophecy of the Bible, but it's also where the Lord says, I'll put enmity between your seed and the seed of the woman. So there's a seed of the dragon. And then if you read a few chapters later, Genesis 6, you now see what the seed of the dragon is. It's a perversion of God's created people in his image. It's a perversion. It's a corruption. And then you read in Daniel 2:43, which is Daniel is an end times prophetic book. And it says, their seed will mingle with the seed of men, but they shall not cleave to them, meaning no marriage contract. Well, their seed, the author there is making a distinction between their seed and the seed of man. So obviously this seed over here is not human. Well, what's the only other seed the Bible mentions? It's the seed of the serpent, the seed of the dragon. So that tells you, and again, like what Jesus said, it'll be as it was in the days of Noah. We're literally told in Scripture we should expect to see the seed of the dragon at war with the seed of man. So boom, you've now explained the abductions. You've explained the missing pregnancies, the missing time these people have. And for every person like Dr. Stephen Greer, who thinks aliens are benevolent space brothers, just look at their body of work. When people are taken, they're raped, they're literally violated. Kids get taken at 5 or 6 years old. Some of them they've found implants in. I don't even have time to get into that. Dr. Roger Lear, who's dead now, he took out 16 or 17, did 16 or 17 surgeries to remove these implants they found in people, under people's skin, inside their bodies, people who had been taken, and they tested them, and they don't know what they are. They're coated in some kind of material that we don't have identified on planet Earth. We can get, it gets kind of close to a couple alloys, I think, but there's no exact match for it. They don't even know what it is. It's otherworldly. Not everybody has wanted their implant taken out. Some people have. So what are those things? I don't know. Is it a way to track the person? Could be. Is it slowly changing something in their body? Could be. We don't know. But it's is that a good thing? Would some kind of friendly alien from another planet do that to human beings? Would they abduct them? Would they rape them? Would they implant them without their permission? You know, and almost always, if you interview people who've been taken, it's a bad thing. You have a couple psychos who are like, I feel chosen. There's a girl named Marina Sarin. I think she lives in like Spain or something. She's not American. She calls herself a star child, and she's been taken, but she's also into like the occult. And so she talks to these beings, and she's convinced that she's a chosen carrier. You know, she's like a bridge between them and mankind, and she's been chosen. And she says she's also been impregnated multiple times by these beings, and that she knows she has kids that are with them. They're not here on Earth with her. And she thinks it's a good thing. But she's a weirdo. She's got a website and everything. You could find her easily. She's dabbling in the occult, and if you're going to listen to evil spirits, you can guarantee one thing: you're being lied to and you're being deceived. And she doesn't know that. Why? She doesn't have a biblical worldview. She's got a twisted up view of good and evil, unfortunately for her. But the point is that the majority of the time that if people are taken, they're a victim of this. It's not a good thing. It's a torment. It's terrifying. They know when it's coming, and they don't want it to happen. And the sad thing is, no one believes them, because if someone walked up to you and told you they'd been abducted by aliens, you're going to be like, why don't you lay off the acid? Okay. You've got the best weed of anybody. You should probably stop doing drugs, or you need to, you know, Trump has mentioned bringing back insane asylums, which I hope he does. You would suggest they go check themselves into one of those, which is what I used to think, but I also hadn't studied the subject. And when I did, and I listened to people who are trustworthy, like Dr. Marzulli, Chuck Missler, who's in heaven now, Russ Dizdar, who's also in heaven now, plenty of people who, they're not at all lunatics. They're professionals, very intelligent. They're researchers, authors, filmmakers, many of them. It's not a made up thing, as strange, as hard of a pill it is to swallow. It's a real thing. And again, I think it perfectly explains what the Bible has prophesied, what's coming in the last days. And this is just the way it's being established. So that being said, we're about to end part 2. I'm going to pop up my graphics, ways to find me. Again, X and what am I live on? Rumble, Instagram. I'll post at the end of either today or tomorrow. I'll post on Substack and YouTube, and audio only on Spotify. Please go follow on especially Rumble. I don't care about YouTube. They're censoring me anyway. But Rumble, if you're watching on Rumble, or you would watch on Rumble, please follow me on Rumble. I don't really care about the other ones, to be honest. And then there are ways if you want to support Amber Alert Podcast, you can via any one of those three. I'm going to pick this up in about 10 minutes for part 3 of this episode. And it's going to be, I know I'm already talking about the Bible, but we're going to get into it in a very different way. I'm obviously I'm talking to people about what's in the Bible, and people who read the Bible don't even believe that part. Probably because if you read Genesis 6 and you just I don't know, you dismiss it. You read about giants, you dismiss it because you don't know. But I'm telling you, if you pay attention to it and you search for understanding, you'll find, there's something to this. And the more of the Bible you understand, the better off you're going to be. And it's going to explain what's going on around you too. So we're going to get into the Bible in part 3. It's 8:56. So I'm going to end this live stream, and then I'm going to come back at 9:10. At 9:10, I'm going to start a new one for part 3. I'll go live again on X, on Rumble, and Instagram. So I will see you in 14 minutes for part 3. So long.